and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understandings of the teachings and practice, it is offered as a practice of dana paramita. And dana is a Pali word which means generosity or to give freely, and this is done without expectation when the opportunity arises. And those who share their teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis, so you can support their practice by giving what you can by going to greattreetemple.org and clicking the donate button. Our speaker today is the abbess of Great Tree, Rev Teijo Munnich. Daiju Teijo means Great Tree Right Stillness. Rev Teijo is a disciple and Dharma heir of Rev Dainin Katagiri. She studied with him from 1975 until his death in 1990, receiving formal training at Hokyoji in Minnesota, Tassajara Zen Mountain Center in California, and Hosshinji Sodo in Obama, Japan. Rev Munnich was ordained as a Zen priest in 1981. In 1983, she began to envision a practice center and community, and at its heart, a residential practice for women. And this came to be Great Tree. Welcome, Teijo.
So what's the title today?
Ascending the Mountain.
Okay.
Title of your thought.
I wasn't sure about that. Thank you. So good morning. As some of you know, I've been kind of grappling with this question about what does it mean? What does this ceremony mean? This mountain ceremony for a while. I'm calling months. Talked about how there's three kind of steps in a monk's practice, monks or nuns' practice. The first is to ordain, and that's called going up the mountain, because after you ordain, you go to the monastery and train. And the second is going back to the marketplace, kind of. He didn't say it in that way, but basically going back into everyday life and taking what you learned from the practice in the monastery into real life situations. And then when you take on a temple, it's going back to the mountain. It's called ascending the mountain or becoming the mountain. So this question of what it means to become the mountain has become very dominant in my mind for several months. And the question about what does it mean to become the mountain? We've been reading the Mountains and Waters Sutra and commentary that was put together by Reverend Shohaku Okamura. And the thing that Dogen seems to keep saying over and over is that we are already the mountain. We are all already the mountain. And it's just a matter of us recognizing that. And what he says, what the mountain is, I had a quote. I've got so many notes that I can't find anything. He says the mountain is a name for the entire network of interdependent origination. Interdependent origination means that the relationship of things within life itself. And I always kind of turn to the term that Dogen Zenji uses in the Bendowa, the wholehearted way. It's Jiju Yu Zanmai. And Ji means the self, and Ju means actually giving and receiving. And Zanmai is, Yu is the function, and Zammai is the Japanese transliteration of samadhi. So the samadhi of the self-giving and receiving, the function of the self-giving and receiving, and is a kind of a literal thing, but Ju, the compound, means the joy of giving and receiving. And I say giving and receiving because this character, which is now translated as receiving, the original character has kind of a hand reaching down and a hand reaching up and a boat in the middle. And so it means kind of the vehicle of receiving and giving, because they can't really be separated. And to me, this Jiju Zammai, which, you know, it has that connotation of joy, of receiving and giving, is really kind of an expression of interdependence. That there's a constant giving and receiving in life itself, not just between humans, but the self which can't be separated from everything else. So even when I say that, I think, well, that's kind of discriminating to make that kind of comparison. And Dogen Zenji is always pointing to our tendency to discriminate through language. For example, one of the things that he points to in his commentary on the Heart Sutra is that, yes, we can say form is emptiness. We can say emptiness is form. Relative and absolute are not separate as what it's pointing to. But he says, even by saying form is emptiness, we're already creating a separation between form and emptiness. So he says we should say form is form with the understanding that within form, emptiness is there. Or we should say emptiness is emptiness with the understanding that within emptiness, form is there. So this tendency to discriminate, of course, is a human tendency, but going kind of beyond that tendency to discriminate, or you could say, instead of beyond, you could say before we discriminate, then there is just oneness. And becoming the mountain, you know, Dogen isn't saying that we become the mountain over time. He's saying we already are the mountain, and that becoming the mountain is recognizing that. And I always go back to this in just about everything I say. It means letting go of our perceptions of what a mountain is and what we are, and that we have any kind of separation from the mountain. And in the last section that we read, he says mountains flowing. And Shohaku points out that we have a tendency to not think of mountains as flowing. And when we were talking about it, we were saying, you know, and I think Shohaku points to this too. I don't remember whether it was just our discussion or whether he's pointing to it, but this, to think of water as flowing, we just assume that, you know, assume that we understand that. But do we really know what water flowing is? But if we think about mountain as flowing, that's another, it's kind of an adjustment of our thinking, because we usually think of a mountain, the stability of the mountain, as something which is not moving, not flowing. And Dogen says, but the mountains are walking. The mountains are constantly walking, and we are walking with the mountains, and because we are walking, the mountains are walking. So, you know, just kind of a mind-blowing thing. So I go back and forth as I'm thinking about what does it mean to become the mountain, between this realization that Dogen Zenji is pointing to, and which kind of I knew when I heard this term that we are already the mountain, and to try and figure out how to become the mountain is grasping. You know, it's that dukkha. It's grasping at understanding, which is what we do with our minds. And in a sense, that's an important function of the human mind, even in understanding absolute reality. We have to kind of have that way-seeking mind, that it's one-pointedness. That is something that the experience of samadhi or oneness points to. Samadhi is sometimes translated as concentration, but I think that word is a stumbling block for myself anyway, because I think of concentration as something that my mind is doing. And Katagiri Roshi used to talk about samadhi as oneness, and the experience of oneness is something that we experience in zazen, in our meditation practice. And Thich Nhat Hanh talks about it as one-pointedness. And he gave me an insight into that one-pointedness, that one-pointedness is just that returning to the point, kind of returning to what it was that causes us to seek. Sherry Hubers puts it this way. She says, that which we are seeking is what is causing us to seek, or what is causing us to seek is what we are seeking. She says it, I don't know which way she says it, but the seeking itself is the letting go. We have to let go of the thought that we can't attain it. That's the Bodhisattva vow. Or the thought that we can attain it. We have to let go of that constantly, or that there is something to get, that there is something to attach to, that there is something to hold on to. And of course, this goes back to Buddha. You know, Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is dukkha, that we feel unstable and we're always trying to get something. And when we are in the process of learning how to awaken to that being something that we can't hold on to. That experience is something we can't hold on to. I don't know how I started that sentence, so I don't know how to finish it. But that's really what allows us to continue to seek. People come to this practice and with beginner's mind, and there is an awakening that happens because of the beginner's mind, because beginner's mind is the thinking that we don't know what we're doing, but doing it anyway. And then at a certain, and when we come with this beginner's mind, we always awaken. We always experience awakening. And we notice it. We don't notice it maybe when it's happening, but afterwards it's like, wow, yeah, something I didn't know. Now I see it. You know? And so we think this is a great practice. But then the longer we do it, the more we feel like, well, you know, I've been doing this for a while and I should be a little more advanced than this. Right? And so then sometimes this causes people to leave the practice. And if we're fortunate, as I was, how do you turn that off? Thank you. I know you did it once.
Do not disturb.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I don't know if you can hear this, but messages, text messages are coming in and it dings every time. So I was fortunate because not only was I drawn to my teacher Katagiri Roshi to learn how to meditate. I met him in California, and but he was living in Minnesota, and so I had started my trip in Minnesota, so I just returned home, and my idea was I wanted to learn how to meditate from him. I don't know what it was about him, about his presence, that caused me to say, I want to learn how to meditate from this person. But there was something about his own devotion, or I don't like that word devotion so much, his own commitment to Zazen practice that caused me to think that there was something I could learn from this person. And then when I got to Minnesota, there was this container of practice that he had created that I could just plug into. And it took many years for me to figure out why I got so driven by the practice. But it was really after I had been to Tassajara, I had been to Japan, I had done a lot of practice in Minnesota, both at the city center and at our monastery with Katagiri Roshi. And I came back, and 4 months later, there was Rohatsu Sesshin, which is a traditional sesshin commemorating Buddha's awakening. And it's done at least all over the Zen world from December 1st to December 8th. And then because December 8th is the enlightenment, a celebration of Buddha's enlightenment. And it's traditional to sit up all night the last night. And I had done that a few times in the monastery, but we didn't, in Japan, but we didn't actually sit up all night as a group for the last night. We only sat up till midnight. But I had done it on my own, and of course fallen asleep and slouched, and it was a very unpleasant experience the next morning. But when I did it, the last time that Katagiri Roshi did a sesshin, a Rohatsu sesshin, he had this idea that we would sit up all night. And so we did. And I had never sat up all night without sleeping. But I was sitting right next to him, and I didn't sleep at all that night in Zazen. And even though he gave us some periods which were called sleeping Zazen, but I didn't sleep. And I noticed in the morning that I didn't. And immediately I became aware of how the strength of his practice had affected me so much. Not just in that situation, but that was the thing. It was the container that he created, but also the power of his practice. And we have that effect on each other when we do this practice, even though we don't notice it. It's a little more noticeable during sesshin, because we're together for a few days and we all kind of really have an opportunity to sink in to the practice. We always used to talk about the third day, how the third day becomes somehow easier. And physically maybe not, but psychologically, I think our brains kind of wear out by the third day of sitting, and we start to just kind of just function. We get into that, what some people call getting into the flow. We get into the flowing of the mountain by the third day. We're not fighting it anymore. We don't have enough energy anymore to fight it. And so we just kind of let go of that fighting spirit and just go with it. And this is really the embodiment of the Dharma. And we all experience it. Dogen Zenji points out that every time we sit down, we experience this. We experience Jiju Zanmai. We experience the flowing of the mountain, the flowing of life. We experience all beings supporting us and speaking to us. But as he points out, even though the grasses and walls and fences start to expound the Dharma, when we have the experience of Jiju Zanmai, we don't experience this with a conscious mind. So sometimes after we've had this experience a lot, we start to kind of notice it in retrospect and say, wow, oh yeah, that was a real experience. That wasn't something that I should dismiss because it's not understandable or it's not familiar. It becomes familiar. I call Zazen, in science they talk about scientific exploration, and when the Dalai Lama talked about this in Universe in a Single Atom, he talks about spiritual exploration. So I thought, well, what is that? When I first read it, I understand scientific exploration. You kind of get rid of all of the variables and kind of try and make one thing. But what is spiritual exploration? And then I thought about the monastery. The monastery, it's kind of, I used to call it the sensory deprivation tank because, there's not too much exciting in the monastery. I sometimes mention how I was asked to write an article for Minnesota Zen Center newsletter when I was at the monastery, and I just didn't know what to write about. But when I finally started writing, I wrote, it's very boring. You can watch the dust. It's so boring you can watch the dust collect on the windowsills. But that very boredom is the thing which allows us to experience life without all of our distractions. I go to the prison once a week. I've been going once a week recently. And I've been going to prisons for several years now. And the prison is very much like a monastery, except that they don't have the option to leave if they don't have that mental option to leave. They don't even have the mental option to know what they want for breakfast. So when they're doing spiritual practice, when they're doing Zazen practice, it's really what you experience in the monastery, where it gets you right down to your baseline of tolerance and that need to kind of escape. And we can escape with our minds only so much. So these guys are really inspiring for me. But their bottom line is they're not doing it well enough. And we all have that feeling. But when we feel that, what do we do with that? There are so many ways to escape, and especially now with social media and just computers and internet in general. There are so many ways for us to escape and find something that makes us feel a little better, and so that we don't have to deal with the discomfort of our inadequacies and insecurities. So this question of what does it mean to become the mountain, it really is all of our question. But this particular ceremony is kind of squeezing me in a way that the question comes up a little more often, and I notice myself dismissing it, wanting to dismiss it. And one of the reasons why I put it on my lecture descriptions for the rest of the summer is so that it would be a little more difficult for me to dismiss it. I wrote some things. What time is it? 11:32. Okay. About this exploration, and part of this exploration is very interesting. You know, it's actually this mountain seed ceremony is the acknowledgement of Sangha. It's the invitation and also the acknowledgement of a Sangha to the leader, the kind of who will be in charge, the abbess in this case. And it's something that I've been doing for the last 20 years. And we didn't have time to do, we didn't have the money to do this ceremony until we got our mortgage paid off. So that's why it's happening now. But Teijo, this person who's been helping us with it, pointed out the other day that for us, it's also the establishment of the position at Great Tree. In Japan, you know, it's a succession of abbots because it's already been established in most of the temples there. But in the United States, you know, we are just establishing these temples, and so I am the first in the lineage for the temple. So it's kind of important. And one of the big questions for me as I'm aging and thinking about the future of the temple is, what is it? What kind of spirit is it that I want to make sure that people understand about this practice that I have been fortunate to be able to experience through the various opportunities that I've had to do the practice. I was free when I started my practice with Katagiri Roshi. I had just put everything behind me that I had ever done or wanted to do, and it was like starting over completely. And so I was free. I didn't have any commitments at all, so I could do whatever I wanted. So I started with Katagiri Roshi, and I threw myself into that and had jobs that allowed me to do what I wanted to do in my practice. And then I went to and I practiced at Hokyoji, and I practiced at Tassajara, and I practiced in Japan. And when I came back, Katagiri Roshi was dying, and my practice then was to take care of my teacher and watch him die and deal with death. And when it was all over, I kind of was like, what just happened to me for the last 15 or 16 years? And even at that point, I went to Japan and practiced with Shohaku Okamura, and his practice was quite intense. As some of you know, the practice in his lineage has become very bare bones and difficult. But then I started saying, well, what's next? And here we are. And so this question of how to share some of this experience, this very deep experience that I was able to have, how to make that available at Great Tree is a big question for me. And so that's one of the things I want to explore in the next couple of years. Is what is important. And one of the things that I noticed when I went back to the convent where I had done spiritual practice with the idea of becoming a nun when I was a teenager, when I was young. When I went back 50 years later, one of the things that I noticed is how there was kind of a broad spectrum of experiences that it had gone through, because in the Benedictine tradition anyway, they change priorities every 6 years. And they're voted by the community, they're chosen by the community. And it used to be that it was just a general vote, and then the top 5 would be voted on again. It's an interesting process. And sometimes it was the same. When I first got there, it had been the same nun for like 3 terms. She'd been voted again and again because she was so revered and such a good leader, such a good example. But over the years, there have been a lot of different women, and I knew a lot of these women. And I came back, and they all had different kinds of personalities. And so they all brought something different. They brought a different flavor or a different kind of scent, perfume, or whatever, to the community. So there's that. But I also saw in Japan this kind of thread. And I don't know what to say about this thread, but it's still continued in some places by some people. So there's something within the tradition that has been somehow continued from India through, in my case, through China and into Japan. And I've also studied with Thich Nhat Hanh. I had several opportunities to study with Thich Nhat Hanh. And there's the same sort of spirit of practice. So that's a big question for me. And in the next few years, I feel like that's something I want to explore, and also explore the whole question of finding someone to help continue this. Someone who has this kind of spiritual quest, maybe a totally different kind of personality. You know, if you read something like what's it called? Waters of Siloé, which is a book by Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk who was asked to go back and translate the journals of Trappist, I guess, abbots, or Trappist, the journals from Trappist abbots since the beginning of the Trappists, which goes way back in France to, I think, maybe the 12th or 13th century. And then the ones who came to the United States. And every single one had a different mission. Part of the mission was whatever needed to be done at that time. When they came to the United States, it was just, you know, growing food, making sure that there was food that was grown, and then it morphed into things like starting schools. There was one abbot that just went out and fundraised, and different personalities, but also different missions. So, but there's also this thread. It's a cloistered order, so that means they stay at the monastery all the time. There's this thread of spiritual bodhicitta, of seeking, spiritual seeking, that, if you read the early writings of Thomas Merton, when he first went to the monastery, when he first went through a conversion, because he wasn't always a Catholic even, he really gets to the heart of what the spiritual quest is about. How can we keep that alive without becoming institutionalized? And by institutionalized, I mean there's a certain way to be and there's a certain way to think. How do we keep that alive? And somehow in my experiences with Katagiri Roshi at Hosshinji Monastery in Japan was a wonderful place to practice. At Tassajara, I found people that inspired me in that way. How do we keep that alive? How do we bring it to life in each one of us? How do we recognize that we are part of something much bigger? Life that is more than what I think. It's more than what I can understand. How do we embrace that and through the very practice, through the very effort, embody that again and again and again, because we have to keep returning. Katagiri Roshi's the first book of his talks was called Returning to Silence. And he was still alive when that book was published, so he may have come up with that title. I'm not sure where that title came from. But that recognition that we can always return to silence. And my name, Teijo, means right silence, correct silence. And, I am not a quiet person, so it seemed a little strange to a lot of people that I would have a name like that. But what I've come to realize is that we all have that quiet in us. But, it's like I always use the example of Pigpen, I feel like Pigpen in the Charlie Brown comic strip. He's got a lot of stuff going on around him. So he seems like he might be kind of dirty, but he's got a very quiet presence. And I think we all have that quiet, but we have to be able to recognize it and not be afraid to step into those things which challenge us to be with the discomfort that comes up when things get really quiet. So I think I'll stop there. We have a little time if somebody has a comment or something.
comments earlier was start you sort of get it right away. And then once you've been doing it for some time, think, shouldn't I get this? Shouldn't I have got, shouldn't I feel like I'm getting this figured out finally? And then you drift away as a result of that. And then I kind of, and at some point, you said if you're lucky, but then I forget what what it's that spoke to me. That seemed correct, and I'm thinking at some point, if you're lucky, it seems like the circumstances in your life provide an opportunity or something to that effect.
And you respond to the circumstance. Yeah, and I think also, Dogen Zenji really emphasizes Zazen, study, and working together. And he also really emphasizes that we shouldn't sit alone too much, because then we're just seeing our practice from our own perspective. And when we sit with other people, when we work with other people, when we study with other people, we kind of influence each other, even if it's unspoken. And often when it's unspoken, sometimes you see someone and they're deeply into their practice, and it just has an effect on you, and they don't see it. And you bring it up to them later, and they're like, I don't remember that. I don't think that was me, something like that. But we all embody it and share it by just practicing together. And I think to have an opportunity or to recognize when the opportunity is there to be affected by sincere practitioners, it's a gift, because we don't live alone. And then this practice of shikantaza, just sitting, if we let go of the compulsion to do something, even thinking a lot, if we just see we're thinking too much and let go, just that long. See we're thinking too much, come back, let go. This helps us to see even beyond the people that we're sitting with. We experience all beings. We recognize the experience of all beings that happens at those moments of letting go and impermanence. The two things that Dogen really emphasizes are impermanence and interdependence, awakening to those things. And that awakening, it's like he says, you can't do it with your thinking, you can't do it with your mind. But yeah, our thinking is what gives us the kind of the desire to continue with the practice. So, but having that kind of container that Katagiri Roshi provided was a great gift for me, because it drew me in some way. And it made me unafraid to take chances. I trusted him. I trusted that he could help me if I got into a bind. And that's an important part of the practice, is having someone that you trust enough. And he'd kind of push me too. And it was a kind of reciprocal relationship there. They say that it's like a mother hen pecking at the egg from the outside, and the chick pecking from the inside. That's that teacher-student relationship. But there has to be, some trust there. Does that?
So, yeah.
Okay. It sounded like you had a question there.
Well, a lot of times I have a question, but I haven't identified it. So.
Yeah. It seemed like your question was, what is it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's all of our question, but. Any other thoughts? Could you speak up?
I think the question that you asked and then your answer, and that was something that stuck out to me too. Like you talking about your teacher and like the thread and like what being a monk is. It made me think about like sometimes for me in my practice, I just like deal with like doubt about the value of my practice or what it like does it make me more like does it is it making me someone who's more available to others or like my desire is it making me closer to that like and I doubt if like there's value in it sometimes for me but then you inspire me and like knowing that thread and the experiences like you said that you experience when you sit up interconnectedness are what help me continue because I feel like without if I was just by myself I would just be like what is am I even becoming like is this what is this doing like is this does this have any value or am I just sitting here like I don't know like am I getting worse or am I like not like am I just ignoring things that are important or not noticing things that I need to when I'm like I don't know those are like things that I struggle with but I think probably a lot of people do so that's why I think what you said about your teacher and our teacher and like the value of the mountain seat ceremony and the thread of like something that you can see and believe in that can to continue the comment.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, and I know that Katagiri Roshi had those kinds of same kind of doubts about himself. You know, and because I was just thinking, you know, one of the things that keeps going through my head is, oh, I wish I could embody the Dharma like he did, you know, but he used to often say, the stupid guy, you know, and I used to think, oh, he's so humble, you know, but I think it's more than humility. We do have that doubt, and that's to me, that's the real seeking is to just go beyond that doubt and just continue. And, you know, Genjo was talking about faith the other night, and I was thinking about faith is, you know, it's kind of a fearlessness. It's kind of knowing that there's something beyond what we get caught by, beyond the way we see things, and being afraid of it and still doing it. To me, that's fearlessness. So thank you very much for these comments. Let's finish up.
We'll get back the merit. That's a common response. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace. Now I'll do the 3 prostrations and we'll do the exit bells.